At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
And welcome to the Author Brand Show. I'm your host, Doug Crow, and I've got a great guest on today, not because he shares my first name, but because he is actually president, founder, CEO of Headway Exec. He works closely with executive clients around the globe, all right? He's helped individuals. He develops their advanced leadership skills, and he's leveraged his own executive coaching training to create, implement effective leadership development programs and advisory services for businesses you've heard of, ExxonMobil, Coca-Cola, Raytheon, UPS, Centerpoint, Federal Reserve, HSBC, and Bank of America. Don't be overwhelmed. Of course, he also works with middle-sized and smaller businesses as well. He's got a simple 4-part navigation system to help grow their companies. And we're going to talk about that and a few other things today. So without further ado, welcome to our show today, Doug Thorpe. Doug, how are you?
I'm very good, Doug, and we'll quit the name game here to not confuse everybody.
I'll call you Mr. Thorpe.
Pleasure to be here, yeah.
Mr. Thorpe.
Or just say you is fine. That'll be great.
So why should people bother listening to us for the next 20, 25 minutes? What are we going to share with them that's going to go, wow?
Well, I think to really get juicy quick, one of the things that I frequently run into, I have owners who come to me complaining about the so-called generational difference in the workforce. They're maybe older owners, boomer types that have been at their business a while. They realize to get to market and continue to hire staff, they got to hire younger and younger. And it creates problems for them. And they say, they get into all the statistics about the names and the demographics and everything. I have been a long advocate of what is ultimately a very contrarian view about all of that. And I know some really smart people have done some really big studies and tried to help us, anybody in a leadership role, figure out tweaks and tricks to help mitigate all of that. My bottom line is they're just people.
Yeah.
And if you're the leader of an organization and you're not willing to meet them where they are, and that's probably where the controversy starts, right? Some owners want their employees to show up and do what they want them to do, not what the employee wants to do. But one of the things I point to support my case, there's a piece of literature I found several years ago, and the first time I read it, I said, oh my God, this is the Millennial Manifesto.
Okay.
If a millennial was going to write their guts about how they looked at the world, this would be it. Well, surprise, folks, it was written by Henry David Thoreau in 1863.
Wow, okay. I want to talk more about that in a moment. Before we get into the meat of that, I want to hear more about you and how you got into executive coaching and leadership. And that's a very popular topic, and you're not alone in this, of course. So what was your background? What was the point where you said, hey, I want to help these guys out?
Well, one of the things I share with people, and I do talk about this on my podcast, I have been in and around leadership my whole life, and my wife unmercifully teases me about being the captain of the crossing guard in school. And when I was in 5th grade, I aspired to be the captain of the crossing guard because that was a time and place in our history where we used to send kids out in the street with signs to stop cars at the school crossing. Obviously, now we don't do that anymore. Enlightened adults have said that's not a good idea. But at the time, it was a big deal, and it was a badge of honor. But more importantly for me, I really had this weird drive inside me of service. I felt like it was a service to the community, my friends at school, and I didn't take it for pride or ego. I just was really kind of wired for the service. And, fast forward many years and many decades, I kind of stayed on that path. I went through military training in school to become an Army officer when I graduated from college. All of that, at the root of that was this desire to serve. And I was an advocate and a practitioner of servant leadership before it was a thing. And I always wanted my organizations to be led from the bottom up, not top down. And I sought ways to make that happen with my teams and for the people that I had the privilege of leading.
Wow.
So I kind of gravitated into it, I guess. And some have proposed that maybe I'm one of those weird natural born leaders. And I know that's a whole other debate about born or bred, but I became a student of it, to say the least, and I've been at it. And after going through many different forms of corporate and entrepreneurial life,
Mhm.
I finally decided to turn my attention to the idea of helping others become better leaders.
Yeah. Well, I love that, and thank you for your service. Appreciate that, of course. And it sounds like that's where that got embedded into your psyche of serving. Being obviously volunteering for the military is a huge act of service. So that's probably part of why you leaned into that area. I'm guessing. Yeah. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And when you started doing that, a lot of people are gonna who are middle sized or smaller companies are always attracted to working with larger and larger corporations. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how you as a consultant. We'll talk about your book too. I'll talk about your favorite book out of the four you've done in a moment. But as you started consulting with companies, what was it about the larger companies versus smaller ones? Which ones you like to work with better and why?
Well, first, let me set aside the larger ones, the Fortune 500, 1,000, and whatever. I I have done a lot of my coaching work there simply because I'm comfortable in that environment. In
Yeah.
my post-military career, I went to work for a large regional bank who was corporate. I mean, it was a corporate gig, no doubt about it. And we eventually merged with what is now the Chase Bank of Texas. So I worked with the Chase organization for a number of years, clearly a global financial brand. And I've, as you alluded to in the lead up, I've worked with a lot of very large financial services. So on one hand, I'm very comfortable in that space.
Yeah.
Walking into a boardroom, sitting across from somebody at that level is no big deal for me. And there's a connection there and an opportunity. But truth be told, really in my own heart is the passion for entrepreneurship. I've also told my audience that I was raised the only child of a single working mom, and she quit her day job when I was still in fifth grade to
Wow.
go start a business.
Man.
And talk about guts and courage.
Yeah.
And I didn't even understand the dynamic of that at the time, but she did it and pulled it off and was very successful.
Yeah.
And but as I grew and got older and watched what she did, and that was my summer job, by the way, was working for her company and helping her through things.
Firsthand.
But I kind of got the passion for what it meant to be an entrepreneur and being out there in the market. But fast forward, when I got into the banking world, one observation I had was there were a lot of great founders who started good businesses, but then hit a wall,
Yes.
just an absolute brick wall of ability to grow that business.
Mhm.
And ultimately, way too many of them failed in the long run.
Mhm.
They didn't make it past that fifth year mark or that 6 year mark. And it was largely because it bothered me that that was happening. And I really started paying attention and trying to study it. And my very unscientific conclusion was it was all based on what was going on in the headspace in their mind.
Totally agree. Yeah.
And 100% of the time, that was the limiting factor on whether or not it made it to that level, that next level. People call it different things. I've seen 3 level models, 4 level models for entrepreneurial growth, but undeniably, you've got a startup phase, then you've got a little bit of a grow up phase. You got your startup idea figured out. Now you're ready to really expand a little bit, but then you get into that scale up where you're going to do it at volume. And it's usually that early part of the scale up where these
Right.
companies stall.
Yeah, that's the whole thing with startups and funding, and guys doing Series A rounds, whatnot. Generally, the founder has not had the experience of scaling, to the multiple digits, whatnot. They're great at starting and creating, but running and managing it might not be their skill set. What's that phrase? What got you here won't get you there, right?
Right.
So what are some of the fundamental elements of growth that entrepreneurs are missing?
Well, as I said, I think it starts with an honest look in the mirror and to try to really get some help either from a coach, from a trusted advisor, somebody that can come in and help you ask the question, what am I missing and what might I be doing wrong that is holding us back?
Uh-huh.
And then plot the course for adjusting that.
Mhm.
And let me go way out to the extreme of that scale for a minute. I have known entrepreneurs that feel that pressure of hitting that brick wall. They can't see the wall, but it's there. They've hit it. They know it, and they keep
Yeah.
banging their head against it. But they've, through advice and counsel and encouragement, they've said, you know what? I've maxed my capacity to lead this. I'm going to hire a CEO or a president.
Right.
I'm going to find somebody that knows how to do this at scale, and
Mhm.
I'm going to let them run the day to day. I will go back to my office, my laboratory, whatever, my workshop, and I'll be the innovator. I'll be the visionary. I'll keep thinking about new possibilities,
Right.
but we're going to work out a deal where they're going to run the day to day and we're going to keep
Right.
growing this thing. And you get part of that mindset shift. You might have to offer that guy some equity in to come in and do that. I'm sorry, that person doesn't have to be a male.
It's fine. I
Um,
use it for the same thing. Guys, girls, the same to me. It's okay.
Guys, girls, whatever. But you might have to give up a little equity, but 80 or 70 or 80% of something really big is much greater than 100% of nothing,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
basic math, folks.
Yeah. When their mindset is in obviously entrepreneurship and growth and ideation, I get that. When you look at scaling and growing, is it more just process driven, or they also are the people who are able to scale also in the visionary mindset? They can just execute better.
Well, it's a little of both, and you alluded to it also in the intro. Over time, I have developed a 4-part model that I use when I go in with owners who are admitting they feel stuck at
Yeah.
getting to the next level. And again, when I describe it, you're going to say, "Well, duh, that sounds pretty simple." But the reality is, it's sometimes very hard to get done.
Yeah.
And the 4 pillars in my model are simple. It's people, process, product, and performance.
Okay.
And bucketed in each one of those areas is a number of elements, but it's ultimately every aspect of anything you're ever going to do in your business
Right.
falls into one of those buckets.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take people, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
The obvious question there is, how big is your team? What do you really need? How are they doing? Where do they sit? Et cetera, et cetera. And often we when I go into a company for the first time, there's always some hangover of the startup phase.
Yeah.
You know, Uncle Eddie or Aunt Jill is still on the payroll, and God love them for the hard work they helped you get through startup. But are they really serving a need that you have to have in the business today?
Yeah.
Or are you just making some kind of familial accommodation for fear of having to have bad Thanksgiving dinners forevermore because you let them go? But those are some tough calls people have to make.
Sure.
So um, then when we start talking about process,
Mm-hmm.
often the entrepreneurial mindset is not particularly geared to process.
No, for sure.
And without a process, you are not scalable, plain and simple.
Yep.
If you can't take an order, fulfill an order, deliver your good, manufacture your good, package your service, whatever, if you can't do that on a regular, repeatable, and reliable basis, you have no platform to scale.
And I would
And
add that without the founder's presence.
exactly. That's what I was going to say. If your model for your process includes touch points from the founder, you don't have scale.
That's right. Yeah.
So that's a big area there. Then when we get over to product, this is where, and again, this is hard, tangible good or service or whatever it is you're doing to generate revenue. The whole product dynamic is keeping your product out in front of the market being fresh. A lot of entrepreneurs get stuck on the daisy chain of if you build it, they will come. Well, guess what? Not true. Very, very rare does that happen and become some incredibly wild success. When you hear about these companies that are just dazzling, seemingly overnight success, inevitably there's years of trial, error, test marketing, prototypes, target marketing, a lot of things that got into perfecting what it is they're really doing.
Yeah. When should a company diversify their product line? I've heard a lot of different reasons of this. One person is client centric. They'll do anything that the client needs and add services as needed. Other person is more product centric. This is what we do. If you want that, we'll have somebody to refer to you. We want to stay in our own lane. How do you decide when to expand horizontally or just go down deeper?
That's a great question, Doug. Sadly, I don't think there's a one size fit all answer to that. I think it is very much custom oriented to the nature of your business and what you're trying to accomplish, the market you're trying to gain. But the ultimate driver of that is the ability to create a discipline of some form of longer term strategic planning.
Right.
That says, all right, here's my market today, but where's the market going to be tomorrow or a year from now or 2 years from now? And I had a guest on my podcast who told an amazing story of a boat builder up in the Northeast, and they were having trouble winning new market share because boat building is kind of a really niche-y, thing. And they started talking to all of their distributors, the retailers that were selling their boats. And what they determined was what they could do as a company, rather than focus so much on product centric development, they started focusing on creating solutions for ways people could acquire boats. And becoming more of an advisor to the retailers on how to build demand in their immediate market and fulfill those orders with quality product. And oh, by the way, we manufacture the quality product that goes into it. But it was a strategic shift in their ability to go to market and show up as a more meaningful solution that just simply, let's back the trailer up and here's your new boat.
I love that so much. I could spend hours talking about that one area of understanding your value and what people actually want versus what you think they want. How long did it take them to actually interview those dealers and figure this out before they made that? Because that's a pretty big shift from manufacturing to basically advisory. How long did it take them to figure that out?
It ended up, as I recall the story, it ended up being almost a 1 year process, but it was all in the spirit of a really intentional strategic curiosity of where is the market going to be and what do we need to be thinking about to better address that market. So it was a mountain of phone calls. It was a mountain of lunch and coffee, talking to dealers, really asking them the question, what do you need? You don't need a better boat. What do you really need? And they got their answers and were able to craft the solution accordingly.
I love that. People always forget to go back to your customers and always ask them, or have someone else do it for you. But somehow getting that real, what do they really need type of thing out of them is so important, so valuable.
Right.
Yeah. What's in the fourth step?
And the fourth step has to do with performance. This sounds like a little bit of a catch-all, but this obviously includes financial disciplines. Again, sort of systemically lacking in a lot of smaller privately held companies is any kind of financial discipline about budgets, cash flows, monitoring. looking at margins and various KPIs that you might get from the numbers.
Right.
And part of the problem with that traditionally, or at least what your CPA will do for you in most cases, and I'm not disparaging CPAs, I'm just saying most of the numbers you get are lagging indicators of what your business did, but you don't have any forward indicators, lead indicators of what you ought to be doing. Things like orders in the pipeline, uh, work yet to be completed, job staffing that is unfulfilled. Some of those leading indicators of where you might be going. And you need to be able to create a discipline of performance management, looking at both, but you've got to be able to balance and establish what the numbers are really telling you about the business.
Right.
And oftentimes that starts with the very fundamental discipline of getting the numbers right in the first place.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurs tend to be a little freewheeling with how numbers get allocated on the accounting system, and a pallet of material might get charged one way one month and a different way another month, and you don't have a good set of numbers if that is happening.
Yeah. Wow. Great stuff for those small companies who are learning how to act like a big one. You gotta trust the numbers and use them the right way, I suppose.
Correct.
Yeah. And I know you've authored a bunch of books. You got a favorite one. Tell us about that.
Really, one of the ones that probably I started with, and it was my first one. It's called "The Uncommon Commodity: Common Sense Guide for First-Time Managers." As I got into coaching, one of the things I realized, we are all living in an incredibly complex and uncertain world in business, and there's actually a term for it that came out of the Pentagon many years ago called VUCA: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
Yeah.
And if managers who are moving up the chain, getting into bigger leadership roles in companies of all sizes, if they're guilty of one thing, it is complicating the world around them.
Yeah.
And I became a self-declared advocate for common sense solutions. That's what I call my podcast, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I once upon a time had a marketing agency I was talking to tell me, "That's a horrible tagline, Doug. You got to get rid of that. You'll never go anywhere with it." And I said, "Well, goodbye." uh, and quite the contrary, I love it. Well, it gets a lot of people's attention, and then we lean into some really meaningful discussions.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I spent a few years in the radio and the podcast world. I avoided for a while because I didn't understand it or didn't think it was going to be what I wanted to do. And now I understand the value of it. It's for me at least. It's about meeting interesting people and getting stories. That's what I love about it. That's whether it's name is right or not. I don't care. I'm not trying to compete with Joe Rogan, so it doesn't matter to me. It's okay. What would be the what's your favorite book? One you've read, not the ones you've written, but the ones you've read. Your favorite?
Gosh, I have an old book that's on my library shelf. It's one that I frequently go back to, and I can't even think of the author's name. He's not a mainstream author, but he's more of a historian.
Mm-hmm.
There is a book called Lincoln on Leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the author that wrote it he combed the archives of all the letters Lincoln wrote to his staff, his cabinet, his military people during the Civil War.
Yeah.
And it is just brimming with tales of leadership choice, leadership value, leadership principles that Lincoln regularly demonstrated. And to me, it's an amazing backstory on what was really going on day to day in Washington at that time.
Yeah, I've heard that book. I don't think I've read it, but I did hear about it a few years ago. So I'm sure it's a winner. Maybe I'll add it to my list myself. How can people get a hold of you and hire you, or get your book? However you want to promote. It's up to you. It's all about
Yeah.
shameless promotion here on my show. So
Well, I think the big thing, if we're going to talk about a promotion, I just simply want to invite people to join me on my podcast, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. We're on all the major streaming channels and on YouTube, channel by the same name. But if you want to talk directly about your business or your own personal leadership development, hop over to my website, simply at dougthorpe.com. That's THORPE.com. And there are many different opportunities to get a free consult and communicate with me about what you may want to do next.
terrific. It was a pleasure having you on, Doug. I appreciate it. Folks, if you want some more information about Doug's book, his consultancy, just click below here. There's a bunch of links here. Check that out. You're going to want to take notes. If you didn't take notes, we got them here for you. Just click below and we'll get the show notes and you can enjoy the show. And don't forget to check out Doug's show. Mr. Thorpe's show as well as ours. And you'll hear some really interesting conversations with other business leaders. Enjoy it. Doug, thanks for being on the show today. I appreciate you.
Really appreciate you. Thank you for all your hard work.
All right. Perfect.